Well, that music certainly set the tone for an exciting day of more adventure. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. Welcome to Friday's agenda for the 2021 Shaping EDU Unconference. Well, I'm really excited to introduce a couple really bright, talented, and amazing students who will be sharing their perspectives. All week, we've been spending time talking about, thinking about, working together to reshape wicked challenges. And our main stakeholders have been students, have been learners. And it's really exciting to have student voice represented here because so often we talk about and around students and how things will impact them without actually asking students and talking to them. So every year, the Shaping EDU community makes a concerted effort to ensure we have a student panel of some sorts. Year round, we have students engaged in our activities and in the design of some of our projects and resources. So learner voice is paramount. I also want to add a little bit of color commentary coming from the ASU world, where our president, Michael Crow, refers to students as universal learners. And this is the notion that learning takes place no matter how old you are, where in the world you are, from the second you're born to, all the way to when you have a career and you're working to upskill. At our heart, we are all lifelong learners. We are all universal learners. So when we think about students, we have great students today who are immersed in programs within ASU, but also I invite you to switch hats for a moment when you're hearing the panel and picture yourself as a learner rather than whatever your day-to-day role is, be it a technologist, a faculty member, an education leader, whatever you are. First and foremost, you are a learner. That's one of our Shaping EDU tenets. And so when you're listening to the panel, keep that in mind. The Zoom chat is also open if you have any questions. So I'm going to be chatting with the panel and students for a bit, but then it's going to be your turn to ask them questions. We're going to be focusing our discussion today around the wicked challenges that we're tackling and getting students' perspectives and ideas and energy around them. But if you have any other questions, related or non-related, this is a great chance as we've got students in the hot seat today. So I'm really excited to welcome our fantastic cadre of students here with us today, are John and Lance. Admittedly, we had a couple people who had at the last minute things to get to and that they had to do. So a couple of the students couldn't be here, but it's going to be an awesome discussion with Lance and John, and we look forward to getting it going. So welcome, Lance and John. I want to invite you both. Actually, something I know I wanted to share about both of you is that you are both involved in cross-sector leadership programming at ASU through the very, very same program that you're involved in. And so I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves, share your pronouns, and then maybe share a little bit about the program that you're coming from at ASU and your sort of tie day-to-day to wicked challenges. So Lance, we'll start with you.
Okay, so my name is Lance Lim. I go by they, them, or he, him pronouns. My double major is within community health and health entrepreneurship and innovation. And as stated earlier, I have a certificate in cross-sector leadership. I would say the reason I joined this event today was just because I got invited by Christina Nyago. And honestly, I want to be able to help bring more of a voice, not only myself, but the people around me in the community that I represent, and be able to put in more of a voice and perspective in a lot of these issues that we see ourselves today. And my ties day to day to solving these wicked problems are that I'm heavily involved within student leadership within my part of ASU campus, as well as ensuring that I myself actively talk with staff and fellow students and how to continue to make an impact in a lot of these wicked problems that we see every day. And John, I want to bring it back to you.
Thank you so much, Lance. Hello, everyone. My name is Janezic. I have he, him pronouns. I just graduated with my bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in applied biology and sustainability. I'm currently a master's of global management candidate at Thunderbird School for Global Management with a focus in sustainability solutions. I, like Lance, also come out of the Next Generation Service Corps, which is a merit-based leadership scholarship program at ASU that focuses on training students in cross-sector leadership and collaboration. So that program focuses heavily on understanding the assets of the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to tackle the complex, wicked challenges that we see every day. And in my current faculty or position, I'm an innovation analyst at the Office of Applied Innovation, where I leverage policy and technology innovations to bring greater academic and economic mobility to the communities that ASU serves. So with that, I'll bring it back to Samantha.
Hey, thank you both. I'm so pleased that you're both joining us. I know we've got Sophie Jones, also a really recent graduate, joining us momentarily. So when she pops on, we'll give her a chance to introduce herself. But for now, we're going to start with some questions. And so the community of Shaping EDU, including a bunch of people you see in the audience today, submitted challenges for us to focus on solving at this Unconference. And then they voted on which ones, seem to be the most dominant or important. So the number one challenge actually voted on by our community was invasion of the degree snatchers, which is really a challenge that calls into question the value of a traditional degree, especially as alternative modes rise, like micro and digital credentialing. I know companies are starting their own upskilling program. We even have prominent CEOs like Elon Musk out there tweeting about how degrees are not needed to join the ranks of Tesla. So that being said, I'm going to start with you, John. Do you feel that the importance of a four-year degree has changed? And if so, how?
That is such an important question. I think it's less about whether or not the value has changed, but how its perception has changed. Currently, I have a twin brother, and he is going through the Google certificate of data analytics. And he's saying how even after his four-year degree, it's still something that he's able to do on his own time and keep learning. And it's a credential that, of course, is acceptable by Google for a job. At the same time, I have a friend who is a high school dropout. He didn't go to four-year degree, but he is very upset because people think that he's uneducated, but he has learned and acquired this knowledge through online tools and similar programs, and says, just because I don't have this traditional label, this traditional certificate that says I went and I got educated, doesn't mean that I'm not. So I think it's more about considering how people are still learning, engaging in this universal learner idea outside of the four-year degree. Of course, there is still tremendous and significant value for the majority of people when they acquire that degree and can move on to much greater things. But I think it's thinking about how we can use it as a supplement, thinking about these other credentials and how they can kind of blend together to really bring more value than just individual kind of siloed accomplishments.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you actually bringing up individual siloed accomplishments. I know myself, I'm just reflecting on my own undergraduate experience, which is probably a little longer ago than I care to admit these days. But I do remember feeling like I got a liberal arts degree, that the disciplines, it all felt very disparate. I didn't necessarily see the connection between my courses and what they would all culminate to. So admittedly, when I was especially frustrated by that as an undergrad, I started booking internships during those courses that I felt like I wasn't getting real world experiences in. And so it's one of those things where, if we're watching a Netflix series that isn't emotionally resonant, we change the channel. I think the same could be said for courses. And I feel like students these days are really good at smelling out what's actually going to help them and what's not. So, those are the decisions we're making day to day in terms of how to proceed with our future. Thanks, John. Lance, I'm going to throw it over to you about the importance of a four-year degree, but also how you feel this is anticipating your ability or either other students' abilities to land their dream careers.
I will say that the four-year degree still stands as a very valid way to verify knowledge. I know that the 4 degree is a standard for a lot of fields, especially those in high STEM areas and medicine, as a way to ensure that all people who are coming into this career path have all the knowledge needed to successfully do all the tasks that they have to do. However, I do think that the advent of online courses, self-teaching, and all of that has made education more accessible to all people, in that not only can someone who is well established in one career be able to transfer, pivot, or even bring in a new perspective that they have self-taught or taking the time to learn for themselves. A big example of this is people who often pick up a second language or better understand a culture through self-teaching. This allows them to be a better advocate and bring better accessibility into the workforce with language management, whether it be a spoken language such as Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, or it could be a form of like sign language to be able to be more inclusive for deaf and hard of hearing people. I think that a 4-year degree is excellent, but I feel like with this age of added educational accessibility for people, it allows people who often do not have the ability to afford a 4-year degree or have the ability to set the time for a 4-year degree to be able to get an education that is close or be able to give them an education that rivals or even meets at a 4-year degree. And I think that, you know, being able to do things like online certificates actually also helps people with degree exploration. I know for myself, I actually switched majors within my sophomore to junior year of college. I was actually originally a nursing student. And I really think that education, whether it be internships, online certificates, even just looking up books and videos to be able to teach yourself really allows people to not only get an interdisciplinary mindset, but be able to supplement a lot of the gaps that they've had with their education. I mean, I switched my major because even though I loved medicine, I knew that there were gaps in my learning, especially with those that involve a community or public setting, or those with the constant change of innovation within the medical sector that happens basically every day.
Thank you for sharing. And I really appreciate you drawing attention to the power of, online education too, and certificates and in these micro experiences. Because you were both engaged in this cross leadership certificate, I'm hoping you could share a little bit more, because especially when John brought up the silos between courses, I think we're starting to see more interdisciplinary, more multidisciplinary. So tell us a little bit about sort of some of the what worked has worked in the cross leadership certificate, and maybe parts of it that you might recommend are scaled to other parts of the institution or other institutions.
Yeah, I can hop right into this. So the NGSC, or Next Generation Service Corps, this scholarship program that we're talking about, it was mostly effective through the hands-on learning. So part of being in the program, as a student, you're required to take an internship in one of the 3 sectors during each summer. So whether you start with nonprofit, start with government, or you start with private sector, you're going to have experience in each of those by the time you graduate. And so to me, that looked like, volunteering while I was studying abroad for a nonprofit. Like that counted as my internship experience. And then working at ASU, and then doing a white paper for one of my professors at Thunderbird, that also counted as like my private sector experience. So it's really about this hands-on engagement and really diving into what each of these sectors is doing and understanding, okay, just because we have a system that right now looks largely, dysfunctional to an extent, like it's thinking about how each of these areas, each of these sectors can contribute to a problem. So, we can think about, the private sector has immense resources and immense flexibility compared to the bureaucracy that the public sector has. At the same time, nonprofits in the NGO sector have like unparalleled hands-on interaction with stakeholders. So thinking about how we can leverage these assets through our own experiences and then coming out with this holistic, interdisciplinary cross-section, like is just phenomenal to think about. And so looking forward and thinking about scalability, it's really about engagement. It's about reaching into each student's mind and thinking about how can we customize this to get into your interests so that you as a student can have as much value as the value that you're bringing to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Thanks, John. And Lance, would you like to build on that?
Yes, one of the other things that I wanted to add was the Next Generation Service Corps also values, being surrounded by people that are only not like, that are also like yourself, but also extremely different from yourselves. The moment I stepped into the program, I was assigned a class my freshman year that is surrounded by people from different majors. And since I was a downtown major, I often got people from West and Polytechnic campus and even some people in Tempe. So not only do you get people from different campuses, but people from varying degrees of education. I've met people in education, I've met people in global business, I've met people in healthcare, people in nonprofit leadership, construction management, and engineering. One of the biggest things that NGC wants to emphasize is that, even though we are all in different fields and all different spheres of focus, all of our problems align pretty much well in that we will always work with each other in some way, shape, or form. And they emphasize this through different projects. I know that we have to take capstone classes, ideation classes. There's a class where I had to create a social business and research how that's run, and how, if I were to run that, how to maintain a profit while ensuring that I still keep that social mission that my business has started. So really this program not only emphasizes, project-based learning through internships and experience, and as well as volunteering every year, but also make sure that we take theory that we often learn in majors that focus on, nonprofit leadership or business management, and takes it to a level that is understandable for someone who may not even want or at initially needs to be in, to be able to expand their mind what that is, because they emphasize things like business is not often, a scary capitalistic thing. It's something that can be used for social good and can be used to make things equitable for all people if you manage it correctly. So it really prides itself on, immersing us in different cultures, different backgrounds. I've met many people from different immigrant statuses, different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and even different socioeconomic backgrounds, because this scholarship focuses also on giving all students access to learning through full tuition. I have met people who have said, like, I would have never been to college without this program. And there's some people where it's like, it's a very, easy way for my family to know that I will get a quality education, not worry about things like getting a job on the side, or ensuring that education will always be first and foremost with us.
Thank you. That sounds like a fantastic program, and these are the types of opportunities, I know a lot of a lot of people would love to get. I got my own online graduate certificate in nonprofit management, which by name seems wholly specific, but it ended up being a really awesome interdisciplinary focus around fundraising, budgeting, design, business design, and so those are the types of micro learning experiences also that students are starting to elect to do more and more, I think, to show for to increase and even supplement the skills that they're learning in school and their degree programs. So on to the next Wicked Challenge. So something about this Unconference is that we're using Zoom, we're using Slack, we've used Google Docs, we've used Jamboard, we're using a VR platform called Verbella. There's so many different tools that we're Frankensteining to create an Unconference experience. And I know sort of the same premise is now mirrored in learning experiences and in the design of day-to-day student experiences where you're privy to accessing a lot of tools and technologies. But I know that could lead to overload. It could lead to tech for tech, idea and feelings of tech for tech's sake. So we'll start with you, John. Have you felt overwhelmed by the introduction of new tools throughout the pandemic? Or what's kind of your stance been around taking advantage of the technologies that are available to you?
I really like that question. And I do, it's so unique. So I'm well versed with technology. I enjoy, playing video games is the easiest example I can give. But outside of class, I can understand and implement these tools through what I have to do. And so when you think about like Frankensteining these tools into our current education, and especially in the past year, I think it's imperative that we look at the pandemic as a point of inflection or a point to pivot. Maybe not completely redirect, but to really hone our vector here. And so thinking about, we have traditional in-person learning and then the shift that was, a whole paradigm different, going into Zoom and being virtual. I think it was a very, very challenging time for a lot of people. But I think it also it increases the accessibility. We can reach students wherever they are. And so I think as we move forward and we're thinking about Frankensteining these technologies together, it's really, how do we take the tools that we've had to implement, due to the pandemic, and how can we use them to further and supplement, the kind of pseudo return to traditional in-person learning. I like to think of it as a pseudo return, because if we do think of, okay, let's go back, like that to me sounds like we're not embracing the change. We need to look at this technology as an opportunity to really expand, supplement, hone, and address the problems that our education system has right now. And so we can move it forward and think about, how can we leverage this as a valuable tool? How can we leverage it to increase accessibility? And in terms of burnout, that does happen a lot. As we are all remote from home, or working remotely, there's a lot more opportunity to be plugged in a lot more of the time. And so we do need to consider how we're going to manage that balance. Thinking about in-person learning, we have opportunities to take a break, to walk out of the room, to go, to do whatever you need to do. But being plugged in has us attentive and has us focused so much of the time, or at least we hope so. And so thinking about how do we balance the human aspects of this introduction of technology and where it can go, I think is our important next step.
Thank you so much, John. And actually, I got a follow-up question from the audience, and I know we said we're going to hold Q&A till the end, but this one seems pretty relevant based on what you're talking on now. And this is for both of you. Based on the references I think that you both have made to going online or working online, what have you learned, especially in the pandemic, both of you, through the rapid shift to online learning in terms of skills that you think could serve you well in your career? And we'll shoot it over to Lance first for that one.
I will say one thing that I've learned is that, we must continue to make change and always be privy to change, because the pandemic has really shown that a lot of our society values the prospect of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And even though, at times I do agree with that statement, I feel like this was a big wake up call for a lot of people to say, like, oh, may have been inaccessible for a lot of people, or this may have been, a lot more difficult for some people, when technology would have made it easier or more accommodating for many other people. I think that, one of the biggest things I've also learned is that, meeting people where they're at, and meeting people where they're at their strongest, and addressing where they're at their weakest, is one of the most valuable things in not only maintaining productivity, but also making people feel human when working. Because sometimes when we're stuck doing either our own work through passion, or work to keep ourselves as, a sustained human being within our society, we often forget that we are individuals. We are people with wants and interests outside of our careers. So not only has this made me and a lot of people I know reflect on what is important in our lives and what is important within work, and what we need to separate ourselves from work, but it allows us to, when we finally do sit down at work, look at the tools that we have accessible to us, advocate for some things that we may not have right now that we can get in the future to help better improve the abilities that we have online. But also look around. There are a lot of tools online that I did not know exist, that I'm surprised was not integrated further, like Trello boards. I have seen whiteboard to-do lists gone to poop because no one updates them every week. But this Trello board almost feels like a tactile way to kind of address what needs to be done, and even gives the physical gratification of clicking and dragging that board over to a done section when you're done, all without the environmental nightmare that is sticky notes. Because I found this out before, like just recently, you can't recycle sticky notes. And I think that's interesting in knowing that there's a lot of environmental loopholes in a lot of the practices that we do. And I think that online has really also brought in a sustainable front that I'm glad to see, due to a lot of the things we've seen with climate change, for example, of the atrocious summer storm that we just had yesterday.
Thank you so much. And speaking of the summer storm, Sophie Jones will be joining us shortly. She actually lost power, and her one of her rooms has been flooding. So, these are real challenges that we face daily that actually impact our ability to even show up. And so in the pandemic that has only exacerbated things. So same question to you, John. How has this kind of rapid shift to online impacted you, particularly during, the pandemic?
Yeah, I know this might sound odd, but what I've learned is quite less about myself and more about others. So to put it in context, so my background again was in applied biology. So in spring 2020, I was taking a botany class and I was working hands-on in a greenhouse. The minute the pandemic happened, that was all taken away. We could not meet in person, and my professor was less inclined to teaching online than other professors were. And so that learning experience went from hands-on in a greenhouse work to complete disengagement. It was, here's a set of YouTube videos and a short quiz, and that is the rest of that was the rest of the semester. So to me, that highlighted how this shift to technology is as important to the students, but also those who are instructing, whether it's faculty, staff, instructors. Thinking about the systems that we have to support our educators is just as important as the learners. We are all universal learners. We have to think about our instructors as learners as well, and to think about how we're supporting them, because that then has a trickle down effect to the students. And so to me, yeah, to answer your question, it's really, I learned that just because I, as a student, have an understanding of the technology doesn't mean that other students or the people instructing me have that, that same understanding or ability to do so as well. And so thinking about how we can support them, support the people supporting the students is just as important as directly supporting the students.
John, thanks for sharing that. And Lance, thank you too for your thoughtful replies. I'm just reflecting on, I work in the University Technology Office at ASU, and I mean, the work that the learning experience and training and other in classroom management teams did to help get a number of courses, online while the pandemic was happening was nothing short of heroic. However, I did note, some of the really dependent face-to-face classes, like the greenhouse example you just shared, or even dance. I think there was, it was a little bit more of a struggle to adapt those, normally face-to-face and really physical or analog experiences online. I know we'll get to this in a little bit, so I'll just tease it, but I know immersive learning and XR technologies are creating new opportunities. So just something to keep in the back of our minds for a later question. But I just want to pause and invite in a recent graduate, Sophie Jones, who lost power, regained power in the storm. And Sophie, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and a little bit about what you're up to these days since graduating.
Hey there, yeah, I'm Sophie Jones. Right now I work with the Creative and Communications team at UTO, and I'm a recent graduate from the Family and Human Development Bachelor's of Science. My pronouns are she, they, and right now I'm currently going to be going into the Masters of Communication online, so that's what I've got going on in the future.
Thanks, Sophie. John and Lance were just addressing, I think, a really quintessential question that we need to be asking all of our students and those seeking, advanced degrees right now is, how did you deal with the shift to everything happening online and all the new tools during the pandemic? What was that like for you?
I think a certain aspect of it is sheer luck. I was lucky enough to be in an area that has a decent Wi-Fi connection, not in the storms right now, but on a general basis. And I was also familiar, I had computer literacy because I was, I had a family that used computers, so it was just something that I grew up around. So when the transition to remote hit, I wasn't suddenly having to adapt to again, computer literacy. I wasn't having to pivot to suddenly learn the ins and outs of all of these online platforms that maybe other students, maybe their family didn't have a, little family computer growing up or something like that, or they live in an area with kind of shoddy Wi-Fi, so their only chance to use a computer or get used to one or get used to online platforms was heading down to the library when they had the transportation for it. So for me, it was more of a smooth transition, but I heard stories from students who were just baffled at the transition, and it took a lot of extra work outside of their classes and outside what's expected for homework hours or studying hours to figure out online, the environment of remote learning.
Yeah, I mean, just at the UTO or the University Technology Office, we partnered immediately with the library. And I cannot tell you how important, especially during these times, libraries are to campuses. The library helped us establish a checkout, a hotspot and laptop checkout program, because something that I think people don't always remember is, people look forward to the in-person experience because their home experiences aren't conducive to learning. So I was chatting with students who had 5 siblings and they were all sharing a machine. And, to get on at a certain time for their courses was virtually impossible. And so when we are talking about topics like humanizing learning, that means recognizing that learners are all coming from different places, have different environments that they're in, and factoring that in more and more and delivering to them services and opportunities to kind of equalize the playing field is increasingly important. Now, Lance, I'm going to throw it back to you because, especially during rehearsal and today, I think you've already stumbled upon this a bit. We talked about feelings of being overwhelmed during the pandemic, the shift to online, a lot of tools coming up. And so one of the wicked challenges this community has chosen to focus on this year is a quiet place. And this is all about avoiding burnout and feelings of being overwhelmed by students. So talk to us, Lance, about your experience. How isolated or connected these days do you feel to your fellow students and school community as a whole? And what has caused you to kind of feel most connected?
I feel like I speak to this as many people within our generation, but I feel somehow both the most connected I've been with all the people around me, but also the most isolated from the people I've come around me. I feel like because of the advent of technology and being able to instantly message and respond to people, it has allowed us to disseminate information and understand each other very quickly. But I think technology in its whole is lacking a lot of body language and a lot of the personalized feel of one-to-one communication, which often depersonalizes and often leaves out a lot of nonverbal language when speaking with people. So that often adds to the loneliness that we feel. And sometimes people may have reservations in talking about specific topics online than they would in person. So it brings this level of impersonality when we talk, almost like having a business conversation with everyone you meet without the opportunity of being able to connect one-to-one. I think that, no technology system has been perfect. There have been many communication systems, no matter how personalized they try to make it, where I feel isolated and non-connected with people around me. Because, for example, with the Zoom, even though I can see everyone face to face and see some of the body movement that you miss out on, a lot of people, including myself, have had back-to-back Zoom meetings. So after like week 3 of Zoom, I just turned off my camera and stopped engaging because it was just way too much. I think technology hasn't had the time, nor have people have paid attention to the ways that we communicate to effectively transfer that into a digital space that is comforting, is resistant to burnout, and allows people to, feel like they're communicating with other people. But in advent of that, I feel like the times I felt the most connected are often the times where I felt the most casual, the most personal, and the most one-to-one with people. And that's regardless of the platforms. I felt them in FaceTimes, Instagram group chats, Zoom chat boards. Like, it doesn't have to be a specific program. It's often just the effort that not only do I put out there for other people, but other people return back. So it doesn't really depend on the software or the hardware itself. It just depends on not only a mix between that, but also what people are willing to feel open and honest about during this whole experience.
Thanks so much, Lance, for sharing. I know during the pandemic, and I talked to a lot of students who are parents, and even just being a full-time employee, being a parent of a young child during the pandemic was really difficult. So I appreciate you talking about how people have carved out specific places and spaces, be they on Instagram or other platforms, to connect on a human level. For me, Slack is huge. At ASU, we're an enterprise, Slack institution, the very first higher education institution. And so I felt like a void. And I remember feeling a little lonely and isolated as well, especially as an always remote employee and an online student, at least a few years ago. So I created a couple Slack channels that I felt were needed. One was a parenting channel for all the parents to kind of share tips and even commiserate with each other when appropriate around what it was like learning and working with, small children on our laps. I know there's been a number of Unconference attendees who have been tuning in with babies on their laps as well. And so I think this pandemic has made people more open to realizing that people like need to be authentic and show up authentically, and people have been very supportive. But without that channel, and immediately after day one, there was like 300 parents in there because there was such a void and we needed to find each other. And another channel that was an outcome of the pandemic was the meme or GIF of the day channel. I know it sounds silly, but this came up in conversation at the Unconference yesterday. Humor being one of the number one skills for bolstering resilience. How can we, kind of find the light in the storm sometimes and share the things that are making us laugh and all of the noise. So Lance, I really, really appreciate your perspective there. Continuing this thread of students and student voice and supporting students, one of the biggest wicked challenges brought up, surfaced at this Unconference has been silence of the students, and why we need to prioritize voice and choice for lifelong learning. So John, I'll kick this one over to you, and then Sophie will go to you next. What's important to you as a lifelong learner, and how has that evolved in your own journey?
That's a great question. And I've battled with kind of this existentialism about, my learning for a while. And I think, what's important about it is really the human aspect. I know we're talking about this application of Zoom and technology and getting into people's lives, but we literally have a portal into people's lives now. You're talking about attendees with children, and if I wanted to, I could change my virtual background and show you, this is a picture of my dog, right? Like I can show you directly into my life, and if you weren't looking at this virtual background, you would see my bedroom. So things like this allow us to really, get a hold of the humanity of all of this. And I think as we think about like lifelong learning, it's really understanding that humans change. Both Lance and I, and Sophie, I don't know if you have too, but we changed our majors. I started my first year at ASU as an engineer. 3 months later I changed. And so understanding that people are capable of change and supporting the idea that just because you have a premonition, right, you have a predetermined plan of I want to do X, I want to do Y. I think understanding that we need to support students in that flexibility in opening those doors. And, this goes even back to our conversation about like interdisciplinarity. Like all of our learning can be linked to another sphere of thought. It could be linked to another industry, another sector. That's why I studied interdisciplinary studies, like thinking about how our world is really not just these, bubbles or silos. It's, we need to think about how everyone can come together and support the learning individually from each of those spheres. And then hopefully that would lead to a greater de-siloing as we progress with our, our whole universal learning journey.
Thanks, John. So for your between degrees, having just attained your undergraduate and now going for your graduate. So what are you valuing most as a lifelong learner, and how has that evolved in your own journey?
Yeah, I think what's most important to me would be empathy, just understanding that vast diversity of student experiences and ensuring that all those communities are equitably served. And if not, that you take the time to place yourself in their shoes and empower their learning style or what they have available to them, as opposed to inadvertently stonewalling and saying, well, this is the way that we've always done things, this is the way that I'm going to do things, adapt. And I'm all for a little bit of flexibility. Sometimes if you really know your students, you want to push them outside their comfort zone because you know they're going to be so good if they just take that step, right? But I think what has always meant the most to me as a learner is when my professors take the time to empathize and go, you know what, I know you're trying to get the content down. Something isn't clicking, something isn't working. What is it that's the obstacle here? And then using that to our advantage, exploiting what does work for me. But that all relies on, professors are supremely overworked, and I have the utmost respect for them. So sometimes when you have a classroom of 300 kids, it's so hard, or not kids, there's learners of all ages, but Yeah, it's so hard to take the time to personalize the way that you interact with every single student. And sometimes you might be tempted to just say, you know what, I'm sorry it's not working for you. Just reread the content, let me know if you still don't get it, and just kind of leave it at that. Um, so Professor Burnout is something that kind of is front of mind when, you know, I think a professor isn't working with me that much, and it's having a really detrimental effect on my education. One of the first things I wonder is, you know, well, maybe I'm not the only one struggling here. So food for thought.
Yeah, sometimes we feel alone and we're not alone. And if we were to turn to our left or turn to our right, whether metaphorically or figuratively, there would be a student in a similar position. And Lance, I appreciate the color commentary you're adding to the chat in response to some of our attendees. And I'm gonna kind of throw a similar subject over to you. Just continuing this thread that John and Sophie are pulling on. How can a student's voice be the primary voice in their education journey with all the other voices coming at them?
I think, a poignant way of making sure that student voices stick out is just ensuring that you go through the proper channels and making sure that you have advocates at your side to ensure that not only are you bringing the conversation to the table, but someone holds other people accountable to listen to your voice and ensure that things are being done with what the suggestions you have made. I've had 3 years of experience in student government as well as 3 years in experience in the Next Generation Service Corps. And with working with staff one-to-one in ASU, one of the biggest things I've seen is that even though many people are receptive to the new ideas you have, ideas are quickly accepted as they are pushed to the side and forgotten about. So not only ensuring that we bring spaces for students to talk and express their feelings, we must also create spaces where people hold other people accountable, such as if a student is, talking about problems within her Zoom classes or her unsavory interactions with other classmates, that we shouldn't just surface level listen to what they're saying and move on. We must digest and understand what these students are saying. Ask them, like, this is what we're understanding, this is what we're hearing, and this is what you want from us, and ensuring that we get the message correctly from what they are saying, and making sure that there's at least one person holding themselves and the people around them accountable to make that happen. Because not only are student voices valuable, but action that backs up our student voice is just as valuable. Because even though we always hear people say, oh, we want to hear from you, oh, we want to make sure that you feel heard, hearing is just not enough. We want to see action, we want to hear change, because we can scream into the void, we can scream into leadership all we want, but if we do not see change happening, that is a level of silencing people. And that is a level of ignorance that you have on other people that devalues their voice. And if anything, is more harmful, because for students who may not have the opportunity to speak their voice, they wait for that time for them to speak up. But if we continually ask students for their opinion and disregard it, it's almost like we're training them to say, no, the voice actually doesn't matter. We will listen, but we won't do anything. So we must, reinforce what we say about we want to hear from students and we want to hear from underrepresented voices. We must back that up with actions to ensure that that voice still has value and that voice still makes an impact for those that are disproportionately affected by all the situations we're in.
Well, so follow-up question to that, and yes, clapping, yes, please use your reactions, show these students some love. These are some of the most thoughtful responses around some of these really key issues, and I really appreciate it. I know I talked about saving audience questions till the end, but they're asking such thoughtful questions that pertain to topics you're talking about right now. So here's one from Christopher Haynes, on the same subject. For any or all of you, do you feel that your institutions currently regularly listen and hear your voices and needs? If so, what's concretely working well? If not, what might you ask of your institution to improve?
I just have so many experiences with this, so I really want to jump in. I will say it's 50-50. I feel like, especially with how hard it is for ASU to keep up with all the student demand, we're one of the biggest universities in the world. So it's understandable, even though it's annoying as it is and how disheartening it feels at times. They can't answer to everyone because there's so many people under their belt. So I think that, even though we want these changes and we want to ensure that things happen, a lot of it is not attainable within a 10-year period. So I think one of the most effective ways that I've ensured that my voice has been heard, and that not only are the problems that I have, but other students and other faculty and other people being affected by ASU feel like they're listened to, heard from, and get the change that they wanted, is to ensure that when you speak to people about issues, suggest solutions, especially if you are well versed in how a department works. If you give them solutions that have a step-by-step basis on what works within their system, or what systems can they adopt very quickly for them to create change, that is what I've seen is the most effective in having them listen. Because as much as we want to complain and expect people to solve these problems on their own, a lot of times people don't know how to see in a perspective that benefits other people. Like, even though someone may make something accessible for us, they might not make it in a way that is truly accessible for us. So, we must ensure that when we give people a cause of action and a cause for change, we direct them in the change that we have. Because if we ask them to change and it's a change that we may not like, it may actually make the situation worse. So I think not only, suggesting change and advocating for change, but showing a blueprint or guiding people, even though, it's not the job of all advocates to ensure that they are hand-holding people to create change, because that causes burnout and causes people to feel undervalued or overworked for their advocating for better treatment. It allows people to develop empathetic understanding and seeing other people's perspective. And this may teach people in the future so that they may not need to teach other people and handhold, so that they may lead by that example and pass it on to future generations of people.
Thanks, Lance. Any builds on that, and whether your institution's listening? John, I see
Yeah,
you.
I really want to hop on this. So I am biased because I work in the president's office of the university. So I am keenly aware of the systems and support that we have available. So it's really challenging for me to hear other students, complain about the lack of service that they're getting. So what I think the solution is communication. Communication and collaboration is analogous to education, and there's never been a detriment from investing in education. So that comes from, making sure students are aware of the support systems that they have in place already, because as much as we think about the change that needs to occur, there are pearls within the system we have already that are valuable, that are functional. And so thinking about how, we do need to embrace change, but we also need to take what is currently functional and build it up. We need to, support students and show them that these resources exist. And that's not just through, one link that they get on a pamphlet during orientation. That's about educating, instructors and advisors and mentors, and showing kind of consolidating the resources that we have so that everyone can have access to it, and making sure that each point of communication is, feeding into the same funnel, right? It's not, let's go this direction, but instead having everyone in the pyramid, understand where things can go and what is available. And so that does go into students, and it all goes one direction, rather than, you have these fragmented ideas of, oh, this isn't functional, or, oh, this isn't working. Making sure that everyone is on board and, engaging in that dialogue to support students. Because if the stuff that they do need for support doesn't exist, we need to hear that and we need to make the change. But if there is something that does exist that can support them right now, then we need to point them in the right direction.
Amen. Thanks, John. I feel like you and Lance with your responses are taking us somewhere really important. So I'm going to ask you, Sophie, if you have any builds on that. What would you ask your institutions and future institutions to do for you to listen better?
Yeah, I think institutions thrive on structure. You have to balance out the chaos of just endless student and staff requests, because we're always evolving. Of course, those requests are never going to stop. However, structure can become heavily relied on, to the point that individuals within administration might hesitate to amend it at all for fear of just throwing themselves into a disorganized mess of large-scale, stressful work. And I find that generally my professors, for example, have been incredibly kind and understanding and flexible, and they offer solutions to a wide array of concerns. But then when they present those concerns to their administration or college, the solution is either turned down because it fundamentally starts to bend and warp some of those ironclad institutional preferences that, well, we've always done it this way. Why would we change it now? Or admin is currently working on so much that they can't add something else on their plate. And though they totally intend to in the future, because of course they want to help students, and here's a solution a professor is just coming to you with, it's all fleshed out, here you go. It's going to take time and devotion that they just do not have right now, on top of everything else. So I think so long as institutions, like John has mentioned, so long as they offer at least some kind of response in the interim, like, okay, we can't accommodate the solution right now, we're going to think about it in the future. Here's an alternative. Here's an array of stuff that we have done that has worked for similar issues. Please let me know if this works out for you. Either offering an alternative or at the very least, like Lance mentioned, just acknowledging that it exists and taking some kind of accountability for it and saying, listen, I can't get to this solution right now. There's so much going on. I'm swamped, I'm human, but I'm going to write this down here. I'm going to bring it up in a meeting there, and I'm going to put the issue you're having at the forefront so I know that it's not getting lost to the void.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Lance, it seems like you had one final build to that question before we move on.
I was just about to say, I think an analogy that I've seen from what Sophie has been saying is that structure within a system kind of acts like a scaffolding within a building. Sure, it keeps a building on top and makes sure that it's operational and functioning, but without all the bits that make a building, rooms, walls, decoration, and the people inside it, structure is just beams. It's just bland structures that just do nothing but stand there and expose itself to other people. Without all the aspects that make up a system, the system has no value. So even though structure is important, it shouldn't be the end all be all for everything, because one, that just creates a power dynamic that is unfair for many people that are below the structural ring, but it also shows the instability of a people and unwillingness to not change in sake for a structure that does not benefit anyone in the long term.
I'm so happy you brought up power dynamics, and especially the ones that structures uphold, because our next two topics are accessibility and anti-racism. So first we'll start with accessibility. With the risk of sounding like a broken record, we know that access does not equal equity, but access is a huge leap towards equity. One of our challenges we're grappling with at the ShapingEDU Unconference this year is Nightmare and Accessibility Street, creating a safe and creating a space and a place for all online. So John, over to you. What technical and cultural challenges have you or your fellow students faced accessing course content or other learning materials or experiences?
Well, sorry, you've quite stumped me, honestly. But I think in terms of accessibility, it's about engaging local leaders. We talked a lot earlier about how, maybe instructors might not have the systems of support to bring technology into the classroom. And so thinking about how, we have these grand institutions with the systems and resources, but that's for us in this system and institution. How do we bring that outside of these, virtual walls and make sure that everyone within the grand system is being supported? And so that's getting local leadership engaged, whether it's districts or whether it's, local governments or, even, private sponsorship, getting into the nitty gritty of our system and getting down into those cracks where people have unfortunately fallen through. That's where we need to focus. And that's how we can really bring about greater accessibility. Because again, this is something that I have been very, very lucky to be able to avoid. I've been able to thrive because of the systems around me. And, honestly, it's disheartening to think that others aren't. Why have I been the one to be able to do this when everyone should have that opportunity? It's not just me. It's not just the few around me, but why not everyone else? I think that's the question we need to be asking.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Sophie, over to you. Same question about accessibility.
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do as a professor or as a professional is just sort of address that feeling of indignity that might come with self-disclosure. And I say that because, I have a chronic illness, she's not going anywhere. And I have dyscalculia, which is the best way I can describe it as like the dyslexia of math, but my calculative reasoning, atrocious, abysmal. And so I've reached out to professors before to say, hey, I've got these two things going on. I'm not asking you to treat me any different from any other student, and I'm not asking you to, take it easy on me. But what I am saying is that I might need some flexibility. Like I might need a workaround every now and again. If I am completely stumped on something, or if I physically cannot make it to something, let me know what you think the equivalent amount of work is, and I will make it happen within the capacity that I'm able to perform if I'm having a flare-up. Or, for example, dyscalculia, calculative reasoning, out the window. When it came to higher level mathematics, I reached out to my professors to see what equivalent work I could do, and they let me know, all right, well, math is all about logic. It's all about reasoning. Can you write, a 5-page paper on philosophy? Can you talk to me about logic and reasoning in a way that demonstrates that you clearly understand without tearing your hair out at 2 a.m. because you don't understand algebra? So I think maybe just addressing that kind of indignity of disclosure, and instead of saying like, oh, you want me to take it easy on you? No, 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 I hold my students to standards. No, it's not about that. Just say, hey, you know what? I know it's probably embarrassing to disclose this. I'm going to make sure that you do the work and that you're held to a standard, but that I'm working with you within the parameters of what you might be capable or not capable of on a day-to-day, and just approaching it with that humanity. That for me has always been such a boon during tough times.
Spirit finger snaps and claps for that one, Sophie. I mean, how many of us also were told, instead of being an accessibility issue, that we were just not good at something, or we should go into a different field because we were having those kind of personal challenges. I mean, I'm thinking back to my own youth. And I could remember teachers telling me that math wasn't my strong suit, or that science wasn't my strong suit. And here I've stumbled into a career in technology, which requires both knowledge of math, science, communications, in lots of fields. And so I wonder how much we're blaming the person instead of blaming accessibility structures that have been in place, as Kisa put it in the chat, since the inception of education. So Lance, with that thinking, over to you.
Hello. So I would like to highlight Sophie in a lot of what she says. One thing that I really want to bring up, and has been a trend in a lot of social media lately, is that gifted kid burnout. And a lot of times where people felt very intelligent and very well functioning in in elementary to high school, but then the moment they reach college and adulthood, they feel like they've hit a wall. For me, I did not realize how many complications I've had to deal with in my life until I finally sat with both a psychiatric professional and just a doctor in general to learn about any chronic conditions I've had. Now it's really hard for me to travel because my eczema and psoriasis make it to where going outside in Arizona feels like I'm being cooked alive. So the want to ever go outside is out of the window, because unless I am in a perfectly AC'd area where I feel like I'm in a fridge, I will be itching, scratching, and hoping that my skin will be filleted off so that I can actually function as a human being. But on top of that, I have anxiety as well as adult onset ADHD. Like, I didn't realize I had ADHD until I was an adult. When I was a kid, I'd always be told, like, oh, you must be a gifted kid. You understand a lot of these classes very well and you've had straight A's. And yet, now that I've looked back on it, I've had a lot of times where I've gotten in trouble for talking a lot, leaving my desk, being very distracted, and yet I'm still performing well. But once I hit college, I realized a lot of the complications, a lot of the issues that haven't been addressed for me. So the moment that I got the diagnosis that I had ADHD, the moment that I got accommodations for flexible deadlines, alternative methods of note taking, and ensuring that I get the class material after class, not only did I go from struggling to keep an A and B average within my nursing major, when I switched over into my double major, I've had straight A's this whole pandemic. I've made sure that my grades are on top of everything. And so far, I not only am on top of my classes, but I have so much more free time to, enjoy my life holistically and be able to not only assist those who may be struggling, but also take time to, enjoy my hobbies, things that I've wanted to do that I've been neglecting since my freshman year of college. So I really do think that meeting people where they're at, not only just in physical and mental disabilities, but in accessibility levels, and also addressing systematic racism and oppression, being able to dismantle walls and making sure that people all have the ability to meet everyone at the same level, not only opens people up to the full potential that they have in themselves, but allows people to feel valued, allows people to feel productive, and allows people to, quite frankly, feel like an actual human being that can contribute to what they want to contribute to, and feel wholesome, feel happy, and feel valued in a way that makes this sustainable for a lot of people to want to be in the table, to want to speak, and to want to do things. Because one thing that I think has kind of been erased in our society today is that people need to feel like they want to do something in order to do it. We shouldn't force people to speak on the behalf of hundreds or thousands of people like them. We shouldn't force people to take courses that they're not prepared for, they're not seemingly ready for, just because that's what the job is. That's what you're going to have to do anyways. I've heard that every single day, and I'm sorry. Half the stuff I've learned in class, I haven't learned I haven't done in my internships, or quite frankly, the 2 jobs I currently hold right now. So honestly, the big thing is just listening to people's experience and what they can and cannot do, and flexing to their needs and to their wants. Not only has been shown by all our panelists and people's experiences in the chat, but also it just is so much better for everyone overall in the workplace and in education.
Thanks, Lance. And I'm going to stick with you here for a little bit because I teased that access doesn't equal equity, and you surfaced, challenges that have to do with cultural and race dynamics. Yesterday, we had a keynote led by the Chief Diversity Officer at Workday around diversity, equity, inclusion, and the role technology plays in education. So, Lance, I'll throw this one over to you first. No pressure to have to speak for any group or have the perfect answer, but any thoughts on how we can reshape our education systems to be anti-racist?
I think one thing to understand is that racism and unbalanced power structures have been here since the advent of just the world. I mean, a big example of this during the pandemic is the disproportionate amounts of people and the dynamics of people being heavily affected by COVID-19. When I took a trip to Colorado with my family, I realized how chaotic it is in the Navajo Nation because they aren't getting the help that they need to survive as people. So in Colorado, there are people who are like, oh, it's maskless. We don't need to take temperature. As long as you have your vaccine card and you're fully vaccinated, we're back to normal. But then when I go to the Navajo Nation, people are waiting in line to use the bathroom. Everyone's wearing masks. I can see people with genuine fear in their eyes, and that temperature monitor in their hand is their only weapon to ensure that they go home safe and soundly with their people at home. Like Black and brown communities are often without access to food, without access to internet. Sure, we made school accessible to people through the internet, but not everyone has the technology, like stated earlier, either the Wi-Fi to support multiple devices or the amount of devices to ensure that everyone goes to school. I think that we first need to address the injustices that we've done to many different communities, and often the lack of education, the prevalence of ignorance. So I think one thing to address is kind of just taking a survey. Every time that we try to make a group decision or a big change, ask people who often don't have their voices spoken or aren't representative in the workplace. Like, I go into meetings and I go into a lot of places and realizing I'm the only Asian person here. I'm the only immigrant here. I may be the only queer person here. Like, oftentimes I'm the only person standing between a homogenous meeting of people of the same identity and, being surrounded by people like me. I am often the bridge between that. And I feel like acknowledging that and ensuring that, oh, let's sit down with people who don't usually represent this type of work, this company, or this event, and see what holes that, may be commonplace for someone who is surrounded by people exactly like them, and realizing, oh, what are we missing that another perspective can give us? What holes are we not seeing that need to be patched up? Because oftentimes the problems that we see are not because these are new problems being had, but these are long-term issues that haven't had the spotlight until now, that people are not seeing or people are not understanding until they've had that education, they've had the experience with people of different backgrounds, or even just someone having the room to actually speak and say, hey, this has been an issue I've been facing all along and we need to do something. I mean, if we want something relevant right now, just look at the lawsuits in Activision. Like, the random bouts of racism and random bouts of sexism within the tech community is rampant, and the frat culture in a lot of communities has not been addressed or has not been counteracted. And I think that, it's time for us to see that, it's not necessarily that something always has problems or something has been creating new problems. It's oftentimes the right people aren't there in the room to speak up before something is put into place. And that we need to take that time to quality check and ask people, hey, this looks good to us. Is there anything you're missing? Because it has shown in our society how bad it is, especially with the racism seen in technology, which clearly shows that people of color have not been put into tech rooms as much as it's needed. Because if algorithms can be racist, that's not a computer thing. That's not something it's born with. A computer is just math. It's ones and zeros. If it can make racist actions, then it's the problem of the people on the computers, not computers themselves.
Lance, thank you so much for surfacing that. And actually, this is not only did you surface some amazing points that we all need to be paying attention to about stakeholder inclusion, but you've also brought up the topic of how humans can taint technology with their own biases. And this is apparent in AI. I'm thinking about the example of Microsoft's Taylor that they released on Twitter a few years ago and quickly became racist because it was learning from the community. I'm thinking about sexism in XR experiences and things like immersive brothels popping up. So technology and its usefulness in solving some of these problems depends on the humans enabling certain patterns in technology. So one of our final challenges for the Shaping EDU Unconference has been around BrainScan 2021, or this notion of the rise of XR, deepfakes, gamification. And there's a lot that goes into that. So John, I'm going to throw this one over to you. What is your take on immersive learning, extended reality, which encompasses virtual reality, augmented reality? Have you engaged in any of these immersive experiences? Where do you see them? Where do you see them headed in terms of helping us solve some wicked challenges?
Thank you for bringing this up. I personally have not had a lot of experience like firsthand with immersive learning like this, but I can attest to what it means. And so when we think about XR, when we think about virtual reality, it's about putting ourselves into another place. And as much as that can be about escaping our reality, I think that sense of escape is about the sense of opportunity that that new environment provides. And so thinking about how these systems, how this technology can be used to leverage that opportunity, and then analyzing, what does that opportunity mean for the people using it? How is that system meeting the needs that they weren't having fulfilled earlier? And thinking about, what can we do to further improve that? As technology improves, as knowledge acquisition increases at a faster rate, we need to keep up with that trajectory. We need to think about, okay, for an example, I'm in a class right now, and one of our most recent readings was a published document from last year. You think about what kind of firsthand knowledge you're going to gain 15 years ago, it's a 30-year-old textbook. But now we have reports and peer-reviewed documentation that is coming out months behind our learning. So we're catching up to this point where everything that the world is experiencing is now what we're teaching. And so thinking about how those technologies can access that ramp and thinking about how we need to ride that curve rather than kind of sit in complacency of, oh, this change is too scary, oh, it's too expensive. It's not. We just need to apply ourselves in the right way to access that escape, that opportunity that can really be brought through that technology.
Thanks so much, John. With a final minute left, Sophie, I'm going to bring it over to you. You actually work with us now in the technology office, coming from the School of Family Dynamics, which is not necessarily the most straightforward pathway. So whether it's XR or AI or some of the, chat, I know you're working on a chatbot project. What are some of the implications you see for technology and immersive learning in terms of being an equalizer moving forward?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about immersive learning, at least in my own experience, is that it's one of two things, either a preventative tool or a catalyst. And what I mean like that is, I think to some extent, to truly exploit all an opportunity has to offer, such as travel or lab work, you do need to experience that in reality as opposed to XR or VR. There's just going to be aspects of the touch and feel of it that are not going to be accurately replicated in XR or VR. But I think that through a virtual version of that opportunity, you can see if a spark is lit within you or if it's just not for you. You might have an idea of something in your head, and then until you experience some version of it abridged or in real life, you're not going to know if it's truly for you. And so I think that is a great equalizer because instead of thinking, okay, well, maybe I want to do this lab work. I guess I'll save up the money, save up the time and the hours to take off of work and go travel and do this lab. And I hope I like it as much as I think I will. Instead, you can maybe do this XR or VR version of it and just get that taste and see, okay, does this ignite that spark in me? Is this something I'm passionate about? Or am I getting there, doing a version of it and thinking, okay, this isn't as cool as I thought it would be in my head? I think it gives you that opportunity to maximize your resources and pursue the opportunities most pertinent to you and avoid potentially stepping into ones where you go, geez, I wasted my time and my limited resources on something that, as it turns out, isn't really for me.
Thank you, Sophie. And if nothing else, because we are simply out of time, we're going to draw this panel to a conclusion by just saying thank you. Thank you, Lance. Thank you, John. Thank you, Sophie, for bearing through a storm and a power outage too to join us today. All of you have been fantastically insightful. I have so much love, respect, and admiration for you. If you can hang on and maybe share some of your contact information in the chat. I have already am receiving DMs and private messages for people who'd love to connect with you personally. So if you're comfortable, I know people would love to continue these conversations, and certainly we're going to find a way to bring you into ShapingEDU endeavors into the future, given your expansive perspectives and insights that I know I have learned tremendously from. So thank you for sharing your time and insights with us today.